Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Boy, Dr. Gee is a tough act to follow. I have the pleasure of working with a lot of different agricultural organizations all around the country and in other parts of the world as well. And you're privileged to have the Ohio Farm Bureau because they are one of the more progressive, one of the more forward-thinking organizations that I work with. And Dr. Gee was absolutely right when he said that the leadership that the Ohio Farm Bureau took on Issue 2 was truly unprecedented. And I know it didn't come without a significant amount of investment, a significant amount of personal investment, and some challenges within the organization. But I think you're to be commended for that kind of leadership. And part of what I want to do today is answer that question about how do we create that alignment between what consumers say they want and what agriculture is doing. It's a great question because it's one of the fundamental challenges that we have. And that's part of what I want to talk about today as we address what consumers want from today's food system. That was obviously the wrong button. We'll try this one instead. As we think about bringing it to the table, there are really three issues that I'm going to talk about. What consumers want, talking really about the research on issues. What are they concerned about? Not their purchasing behavior, but what do we know that they're interested in? What are they truly concerned about? What do we know from our consumer research? Talk some about what business wants, and then most importantly, how do we align those two? How do we create alignment between what consumers tell us they want and what business wants so that we create that environment where you can be successful? Because if you don't have that alignment, you've got that ongoing conflict. And that creates lots of disruptions. It creates opportunities for lost opportunities and creates lots of distraction. So you really want to try to create better alignment between what consumers are telling you they want, how you operate, and we'll talk about some specific ways to make that happen. So to start, we'll talk about what consumers want with our qualitative and quantitative research that we've done through the Center for Food Integrity and with some support from the Ohio Farm Bureau, one of our members, which we very much appreciate. Going back to 2009, we did qualitative focus groups, and we did them in 4 different cities. I want to thank the sponsors who made that possible, but we really began to ask consumers, what is it that would cause you to be more supportive of today's agriculture? What would cause you to grant more social license and to be more comfortable with what we do in today's food system? And we did the focus groups in Des Moines, Syracuse, Nashville, and Fresno. And there were a couple of findings that I think were particularly relevant for this group. First of all, most consumers were uninformed and uninterested. So when you start a focus group and you ask a group of consumers, you know, when you think about food system issues, what do you think about? Most of them kind of look at you like, I don't, which is a tribute to everyone in this room, because they have the very confident assumption that the food will be available, that it will be safe, that it will be affordable, that it will be nutritious, and they'll have many different options. And they are truly grossly uninformed. In Des Moines, we were probing around some different technologies. We were asking about GMOs. Lady raised her hand. She goes, I love GMOs. That's not a typical consumer response, by the way. You don't generally get that from consumers. And the facilitator said, really, tell me more about that. And she said, oh, absolutely. I put Miracle-Gro on my tomatoes. It genetically modifies them. Best tomatoes I ever had. So she actually believed that Miracle-Gro genetically modified her tomatoes. The other thing that we found, which is a little more troubling, was they said, you know, we trust farmers, but I'm not sure that what you're doing anymore is farming. And that's where we begin to have that fundamental disconnect, where they said, you know, we think farmers are really good people. Farmers are people of tremendous character, tremendous integrity. They work hard, but I'm not sure that what you're doing anymore is farming. And I think that goes to the point that you were making earlier. And again, in Des Moines, a woman said, you know, I drive down the road and I see this barn after barn after barn after barn on this huge hog farm on one side of the road, but I never see any pigs. And I don't really have any idea what goes on in there. And I'd be much more comfortable buying my pork from the guy across the road who keeps his pigs in the pasture the way you're supposed to. And that's the kind of mentality that we heard over and over again. Because of the change in size and scale and structure and our use of technology, people say they trust farmers, but they're not sure that what we're still doing in agriculture today is farming. And that has a ripple effect all the way up and down the food system. When people become less comfortable with the technology, less comfortable with the food, it has an impact all the way through from the farm to the table. So the challenge we have is significant. It's about building trust and confidence in today's food system among a public that is largely uninterested and uninformed. You have to help them become interested in who we are and what we do, and then provide the information that's relevant to them. And we'll talk about some opportunities we have to do that. The second challenge we have is that today's food system is not necessarily perceived as being consistent with their understanding or the values of consumers or the positive attributes they've historically assigned to farmers. What we heard from consumers was, you know, this whole size and scale food processing, they take the good stuff out and then they have to put other stuff in. It makes me uncomfortable, and we see them become disenchanted and disenfranchised and then trying to reconnect with their food in lots of different ways, some of which are constructive and some of which we can support, some of which others cause problems for us all up and down the food system. And we see the voices questioning who we are and what we do really increasing in number, volume, and impact. And we see that in movies and in books and in magazines and in radio reports. Continually, this ongoing erosion of consumer trust and confidence perpetuated by the media that continues to raise questions about who we are and what we do in food. Now, my personal opinion is this presents an unprecedented opportunity because this helps us generate the level of interest where we can engage consumers and tell our story in a brand new way. So I think we can look at this renewed consumer interest in food as a wonderful opportunity for those involved in the food system to help people reconnect, to help them understand that absolutely the size and scale of today's agriculture, of today's food system has changed. And it has allowed us to produce more food using fewer resources than we've ever done before. For every package of bacon or carton of milk or carton of eggs that you take out of the case today, it took less land, it took less grain, it took less work, and it had a smaller environmental footprint than ever before. And the same thing will be true next year because of our continuous improvements that we make in agriculture. But we've tended to talk about the benefits accruing to us. We've not tended to talk about the benefits that accrue to the environment or to society or to consumers. So we have to change how we think about how we communicate who we are and what we do in agriculture. We're also threatened at times by those incidents, those high-profile incidents that we've talked about, where there are those isolated times when we see things like the undercover investigation at Hallmark Westland that fundamentally changed the whole dynamic of the animal welfare debate. Because for the first time, they were able to tie animal welfare to food safety. And now no longer was it just that poor cow, but it was that poor cow, and is it safe for Johnny to have the cheeseburger at school today? So they all of a sudden had a brand new dynamic. And we know from our research that these issues are not top of mind consumer concerns. But when consumers see these issues, if we don't immediately step in and provide that reinforcement and support, that those of us in the food system found them as appalling as anyone else and completely inconsistent with our values and expectations for who we are and what we do, then we all get painted with the same brush. And the assumption is that we're all part of the same lowest common denominator. So when we see those acts that are inconsistent with what our expectations are and with what consumer expectations are, those of us in agriculture need to speak out. And we need to make sure that people understand that what happened there was inconsistent with our expectations of ourselves and inconsistent and unacceptable with what we want for the food system. So let's fast forward from 2009 to 2010 and change from qualitative to quantitative and share with you what we heard from consumers in terms of what their concerns are about the food system. We begin each year's quantitative research by giving consumers a list of issues that they deal with in their life, and we ask them to rate their level of concern about each issue independently on a scale of 0 to 10. So 0 is a very low level of concern, 10 is a very high level of concern. And we want to kind of see where food system issues fit within a list of concerns that they address or deal with on a regular basis. And again, thanks to all of those sponsors who continue to make this available, not just across the country, but we also do oversampling in a number of states as well. So, Respondent Profile, fairly typical. We had 60% women, 40% men, half were primary shoppers in the house, very typical of the U.S. shopper for education, income, political orientation, etc. So again, we asked them to rate their level of concern on a scale of 0 to 10, and a couple of things before we give you the specific results that are important to recognize. We divide the population by adopter category because we know that the early adopters, the opinion leaders, the engaged consumers, however you want to describe them, those who are more food aware, engaged in food issues, are the folks that really drive social change on these issues. Those are the people more likely to be reading Michael Pollan, going to see Food Inc., writing letters to the editor and being engaged in those issues. So it was important for us to segment that group and have a better understanding of what they know, how they feel, and what they believe. What we know is that those early adopters exhibited a significantly higher level of concern than other adopter segments on every single issue. So this is a group that is more concerned and more interested in food issues than any other part of the population. And women were more likely to be early adopters than men on food-related issues. So now we're beginning to identify who are those stakeholders with whom we need to engage. Those highly educated, opinion-leading women who have a higher interest in food. And we began to then identify where they're going for information as well. And for the first time ever, we saw a dramatic shift where historically the primary source of information for food system issues for those consumers had been local television. It's now the web. The majority of them are now going online to find information about the issues that are important to them. That's good news for us, because where local television becomes very challenging because of limited time and availability to get good stories about food, we can compete online. We can compete on the internet and make sure our stories are out there. So we gave them a list of 17 issues. We see the first 10 here on the screen. And what you'll see, which is pretty consistent with every single year's research, is that the top 5 or 6 are all about me, my family, and my personal economic situation. The U.S. economy, rising healthcare cost, unemployment, rising energy cost, personal financial situation, and rising cost of food. What's a bit concerning for the second year in a row is that once you get below that list of issues that immediately impact me and my family, the next highest rated issue is food safety. That's something we need to pay attention to. If there's that level of concern about food safety, that's something that those of us in the food system need to be aware of. But then you've got the safety of food imported from outside the U.S. ranking right below that, impact of the oil spill in the Gulf, the global economy, U.S. military involvement. 13 out of 17 is the humane treatment of farm animals, and all the way at the bottom, having enough food to feed people in developing countries. That's a disappointing comment to me about societal expectations and society's attitude toward the need to produce more food. But it's also important for us to recognize that if we want to build support, public support, for who we are and what we do in agriculture, talking about simply the need to produce enough food for people around the world to eat is not a compelling argument for U.S. consumers. They kind of shrug their shoulders. So we need to find a self-interest motivation for them to be supportive of who we are and what we do, but making sure that food is affordable, that it's safe, and that we have a minimum impact on the environment are clearly benefits of today's food system that accrue directly to society and to U.S. consumers. The other thing that we're seeing that is really a fascinating trend that is picking up speed at a phenomenal pace is brands operating as agents of social change, where the global brands are now playing the role that historically was reserved for government because of the tremendous consolidation and integration that we've seen in the food system. I was on a panel a few years ago with Gene Bouston from Farm Sanctuary, and he said, you know, we understand that agriculture has friends in state capitals, and you have friends in Washington, and we're not likely to be terribly successful in a lot of state houses getting through what we want to get done. So we're going to the market because we think we can be a lot more successful in driving change through the market than we can through the legislative or regulatory process. And you can see, if you compare regulation versus market pressure, here are just some quotes from Greenpeace. Their slogan is, we can dance with you or we can dance on you. You know you're going to dance when you're approached. You just don't know who's going to lead. Is it going to be them or is it going to be us? And they attack the weakest link in the company's value chain. So if any of your practices or production efforts are considered the weakest link in the value chain for a major customer, guess what? Those practices will be under attack. So we have to create that alignment between consumer expectations and how we continue to bring food to market. And now, since you've got the top 5 U.S. retailers selling more than half of all food and the top 10 companies selling more than 75%, the target list for the NGOs is very clearly defined. They know exactly where to focus their effort. But one interesting part about that, over the last 6 months, we've seen a significant shift by HSUS in moving from a legislative and ballot strategy to more of a market strategy, but not just targeting the big companies, but going to smaller regional chains to try to continue to pick up more wins, to get more companies to adopt practices and standards that change how the supply chain operates. And the 2 brands that everybody focuses on first, Walmart and McDonald's, the global icons for capitalism. McDonald's for a long time has had a very sophisticated issues management program and system. Walmart has come to the game a little more recently, but has continued to catch up and clearly is committed to playing that role. Lee Scott was their CEO in 2008 when he made this quote to their associates in their annual meeting in Kansas City. He said, you know, we live in a time when people are losing confidence in the ability of government to solve problems, but at Walmart, we don't see the sidelines that politicians see. We don't wait for someone else to solve problems that might affect our business or affect our customers in a negative way. Our customers want products that make them feel good about their purchases. They also want products that are made in a way consistent with their own personal values. Remember that statement, because we're going to come back and talk about values in just a little bit. But because food is so affordable in the U.S., we spend such a small percentage of our income on food, we can demand it now not only where we want it, when we want it, in the portion we want it, but we can also demand that it be produced in a way consistent with our values. And those are the kinds of non-product specific demands that we're beginning to see made around the food system. And they acknowledge that business is different today. You know, he said, we thought we could sit in Bentonville, take care of customers, take care of associates, and the world would leave us alone. It doesn't work that way anymore, and it doesn't. We've got a tightly integrated food system, and there is a very thin line between public, private, and NGO management of the food system. I had the pleasure of being on a panel with Ray Goldberg from Harvard at the IAMA conference in June of 2010 and was really intrigued by his comment when he said there is that thin line between public, private, and NGO management of the food system. Consolidation creates huge opportunity, but also huge responsibility. We need to create managers where and how the public, private, and NGO communities work together to manage the food system. And I think that really speaks to the Farm Bureau mission. Jack, when you read the Farm Bureau mission, I immediately thought of that slide, because your mission, your vision rather, is to forge that partnership between farmers and consumers that meet consumers' needs, address public expectations, and ensure agricultural prosperity in a global marketplace. And you're creating managers to work in that space, and you did that through the creation of the Ohio Livestock Care Standards Board. That was a classic illustration of taking that bull by the horns, and rather than letting it happen to you, creating a system where you've got an environment now where you've got public, private, and NGO interests working together to try to manage issues that are important to the food system. That's going to become the new normal. So how do we create managers who can be more successful in that environment as we go forward? So that's kind of a little bit about what consumers want, what we're seeing in the environment. Now, what does business want out of this? At the end of the day, those involved in business simply want to be able to protect and maintain your freedom to operate. You want to be able to do what you do with a minimum of outside interference. And we talked before about maintaining a social license. When we did our consumer research, we wanted to know what it would take for consumers to grant more social license. And we define that as the privilege of operating with minimal formalized restrictions based on maintaining public trust by doing what's right. And what we see today is that those restrictions don't just come through legislation and regulation, they come from the marketplace as well. When branded food companies say, I'm not comfortable with that production practice, I don't want it as part of my supply chain. I don't like that particular technology, make it go away. So if we violate the public trust, then all of a sudden we will see either legislation, regulation, or the market step in and say, we're no longer going to allow that practice. We want it banned. We want it to be changed because it's important to us to be able to maintain public trust either as politicians or as branded food companies. And you can make a very strong argument that maintaining social license is not an act of altruism, but it's enlightened self-interest. There is economic value in maintaining that social license. When you operate with a social license, the perception is you're operating in a way consistent with the ethics and values and expectations of your stakeholders, and they grant you the opportunity to be more flexible, responsive, and lower cost because they trust you. But once you lose that public trust and that public support, you cross that tipping point, then you move to social control. And it's much more rigid, much more bureaucratic, and much higher cost. It's all about regulation, legislation, litigation, and compliance. Let's take it outside of food and talk about a specific example that everyone is aware of. If you go back to Arthur Andersen, Enron, and WorldCom, the accounting profession had set up their own regulatory system. They had the Financial Accounting Standards Board, who established the generally accepted accounting practices. You had certified public accountants, and everyone kind of trusted accountants to do what's right until we had Arthur Andersen, Enron, and WorldCom. A Congress stepped in and said, you know what, boys, you just violated the public trust. We're going to take away your social license, and we're going to replace it with social control in the form of Sarbanes-Oxley. And the average cost of complying with Sarbanes-Oxley for a public company today is between $10 and $15 million a year. So there's significant economic value in maintaining that social license, because once it's gone forever. It never comes back. You can mitigate the impact, but you'll never go back and reclaim that social license. So investing in maintaining that social license, protecting that, has significant economic value. It's not just altruism, it's enlightened self-interest. And as we mentioned, maintaining that is based on building and maintaining trust. So we've done some significant research with Steve Sapp at Iowa State University to see if we could determine what it is that drives trust. We did a meta-analysis of 21 different pieces of research, and we identified 3 primary drivers. Influential others, which are your friends and family, as well as credentialed individuals that you respect, doctors, dietitians, veterinarians, etc. Competence, which is our technical capacity, science, and skills, and that's where we spend most of our time talking about agriculture, right? We want everything to be science-based. If I had $1 for every time someone in agriculture said it needs to be science-based, I'd own an island and be retired. And the third element that builds trust is confidence, or the perception of shared values. So we're going back to that whole question about values that Lee Scott was talking about at Walmart. They want products that are safe, affordable, and produced in a way consistent with their own personal values. So we surveyed 6,000 consumers over 3 years on questions around food safety, nutrition, animal welfare, and sustainability. And what we discovered in doing the structural equation modeling over that was that the perception of shared values or confidence is 3 to 5 times more important than demonstrating our competence in building trust. And yet historically what we've talked about in agriculture is our competence. So what we hear from consumers is, I trust farmers, but I'm not sure that what you're still doing is farming. We can't give them enough data to convince them that what we're still doing is farming. We have to talk to them a lot more about our values and our commitment to do what's right, and then support it with the right kind of information. What it all means, it's the old Roosevelt quote, they really don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. The good news is you won't find a more ethical, committed group of people anywhere in the world than those involved in the food system. So it's not a story that we have to create. This isn't fiction that we have to write. We just have to change the discussion and change how we talk about who we are and what we do in a way that builds consumer trust and confidence. So how do we align consumer and business interests? We now have a better sense of what consumers are looking for. We know what business is looking for. How do we meld those two? How do we bring them together so that we're able to create that environment for new ideas, for innovation, for successful growth of business and agriculture in Ohio? When we talk about creating a sustainable balance at the Center for Food Integrity, we use a triangle as a metaphor for that because of its incredible structural integrity. And it starts by making sure that what we're doing is in fact ethically grounded, that we can communicate our commitment to things like compassion, responsibility, respect, fairness, and truth, and that we can demonstrate our commitment to that in our practices. The second side is about scientific verification. We don't give up scientific verification. We work in businesses where we measure everything 3 places to the right of the decimal. You need good, solid, objective, measurable information in order to make good decisions. And the third side is about being economically viable. Because let's face it, if you're in business, if you're not economically viable, you're not sustainable. But it's a matter of maintaining that balance between being ethically grounded, scientifically verified, and economically viable that will allow us to be sustainable. And here's where we sometimes struggle. When consumers ask questions about who we are and what we do today, they're generally asking questions down here. Should you house animals the way you're housing them? Should you use those kinds of chemicals on your farm? Should you process food the way that you're processing? Should it have that much sodium in it? And historically, what we've told them is, science says we can. Can and should aren't the same question. We've not been answering the question that they've been asking. They're asking a question about our values and our ethics, and what we've talked to them about is our competency. And we know from our peer-reviewed and published research that values, that communicating our confidence is 3 to 5 times more important than communicating our competency. Because when we give them scientific information or economic information, we increase their knowledge, but we don't necessarily do anything to change how they feel or what they believe. And people are much more likely to act on how they feel and what they believe than on what they know. So we've got to make sure that if they ask a question that's grounded in our ethics and our values, that we've got a good ethical and value-based message to give them. Now, the good news is we do. But again, it requires us to think differently and communicate differently than historically we have in agriculture. So that we can align that consumer expectation with agriculture's performance, with the food system's performance, so that we don't have that gap. Because if you've got a gap between performance and expectations in any relationship, you're going to have conflict. Okay? If my expectation is that my daughters are going to come home from college with A's and B's and they come home with C's and D's, guess what? We're going to have some conflict. If consumers' expectations are that we're going to produce food in a certain way that's consistent with their values and they don't believe our performance is consistent with that, we're going to have some conflict. And that conflict creates the opportunities for consumers to take away our social license and replace it with greater social control and limit who we are and what we do. Problem. Or that's only a retailer's issue, or that's only a restaurant issue. We are so tightly aligned in today's food system that any issue that impacts any link in the chain impacts the entire chain. That's why forums like this are so crucially important, to bring the links of the chain together to talk about how we can work collectively to build consumer trust and confidence in today's food system. Thank you for your time and attention. I think we've got just a couple of minutes for questions, right? Okay. Yes?
If the consumer's not sure that farming, what we're doing is farming, what's the value-based response to that?
Great question. So the question was, if consumers aren't sure that what we're doing today is still farming, what's the values-based response to that? Let's take a specific example, okay? Let's use housing hogs indoors, okay? You know, I'm really concerned about raising your pigs indoors. I'm not sure that I like it. I've seen those videos, and they really cause me some discomfort. I see that, and it makes me really uncomfortable. Well, rather than starting to defend the practice, first of all, acknowledge what they're talking about. You know, I'm really glad you raised that issue. I can tell from your question you care a great deal about animals. As a farmer, I do too. In fact, that's part of the reason we remove them indoors, so we can protect them from predators and from disease and from weather extremes. And we know, now I'm going to support it with research, that I've communicated my commitment to do what's right. Not only do I have an ethical obligation to make sure those animals are well cared for, but we know from over 50 years of research that housing them indoors is actually better for the animal's health. So that's the values-based response. It's acknowledging who they are, what their concern is, demonstrating your commitment to doing what's right, and then supporting it with some information. But for most consumers, they simply want permission to believe that the food is coming to market in a way that's consistent with their values. They don't look for a lot of data. They want somebody who's involved in production to look them in the eye and tell them, I'm committed to doing what's right. And you can count on me to make that happen. Has the size and scale of my farms changed? Absolutely. Just like every other sector of the economy, we're continuously improving our system so we can produce more food using fewer resources and reducing our impact on the environment. But I'm still committed to those same values that you could always count on from farmers. Other questions, comments?
I'd like to just pick up on what you said.
Yeah.
Just if we could just coin what you said right there. How do we get that message across? Because if we don't get that message across, we're not going to have enough food to feed people in 40 years from now. I mean, how do we get that message across? I mean, everybody in this room believes the message that you just gave us, but how do we get it across? How do we widespread make that really, really clear? How do we do that?
I think there are a couple of things. One, you've got to get everybody to support the fact that a values-based messaging approach is the right direction, because historically what we've done in agriculture, we've relied on two strategies. We're going to rely on science, and we're going to attack our attackers. And that's going to be what we're going to do to protect our interest. Insufficient in today's environment. Doesn't work. We've got a hyper-connected society. We've got people who are really interested in food system issues. But we know that we can be successful doing it online. But we've got to find more ways to engage. We've got to find more people who are engaging. And we've got to make sure that everybody is consistent about using values-based messaging. The cool part about values-based messaging is I don't have to train somebody on delivering specific message points. I don't have to give them specific language, because all they have to do is tap into who they are and communicate their very genuine personal commitment to do what's right. But we're going to have more people willing to engage in that process. You know, when I grew up in a very small town in Nebraska, went to a 3-room school, and you kind of paid attention to what was going on in your local area until something national happened. And then you'd pay attention to what was going on nationally, and then you'd go back to your small town. We've done the same thing now, but we all live in digital small towns. And each of us creates our own digital small town based on the interests that we have. But we know from our research there are digital small towns where there are heightened levels of concern about food. So we want to go to those towns and be involved in those towns and live in those communities. We don't have to be everywhere, but we need to be there. And we need to be engaging with those consumers who have expressed an interest in the food issues. Yes?
When you look at the emerging or trend that's here about farmers market, support your local farmer, eat locally, support local businesses, is there anything that you see in your research that as an emerging consumer trend, that approach is scalable? I mean, we see it in Kroger and things. You'll see a local farm called out. Whole Foods obviously does a nice job of calling out a local grower. But is there anything that you see that would lead you to believe that this emerging trend has scalability, or it will remain sort of a small niche in the way we eat?
Yeah. It's a great question. I think it's going to be challenging to scale it beyond a certain point because consumers are accustomed to and like having the same kind of produce and other things available to them 365 days a year in their supermarket. And if I want to have asparagus when asparagus isn't in season locally, I still want to have asparagus. And will I be comfortable supporting my local farmer? Absolutely. Do I think it's a trend? No, I think it's here to stay. One of the other things I think we have to be willing to do in order to support, in order to generate support for today's conventional food system is to be willing to support consumer choice. That if you want to buy local, you want to buy organic, you want to buy natural, that's great, and I support that choice. I hope you'll also support my choice to buy conventional produced food and food produced in a lot of different ways because we need all of those systems in order to meet the growing need. So I think we're going to continue to see that. I think there will be continued value in that. I think the scalability of it is limited simply because it's very difficult to make it scalable based on the growing season and the other ways that those products come to market. One last question. Yes?
With your messaging concept, we spoke about this a moment ago, how consistent can we align that with the marketing and the value-based messaging that Walmart with a leader in the retail standpoint?
Well, Walmart was a great leader in that. If you think about how Walmart's captured that same concept. By the way, we have a document called Messages That Matter, where we've tested specific messages around food safety, animal welfare, nutrition, and technology and innovation. And we know at the 90% confidence level that those messages move the early adopting consumers. That's available on the Food Integrity website for anybody who wants to download it. So if you're interested in some specific messaging. But remember Walmart's previous slogan? It was always low prices, always, right? And it was the happy face that was running around the store knocking prices down. Now it is save money, live better. And it's not the smiley face running around knocking prices down. It's the lady at the pharmacy counter talking about the fact that she can now afford to have her prescriptions filled for a full month because she shops at Walmart. So her quality of life has now been improved because she shops at Walmart. So they moved from the economic side of the triangle to the value-based side of the triangle to deliver that message. They're improving your quality of life. You can save money and live better because of Walmart. So they've done the exact same thing. Thank you again very much. I appreciate your time and attention.